Hello, I am Stormwind Studios instructor and Cybex author William Panek. I've gotten some comments on my YouTube channel asking me if I could do a video specifically on DNS record types, some of the more common DNS record types. So what I decided to do is put together a little video here for you so that we can see some of the more common DNS records and what each record type does. So let's go ahead and let's jump right into it, and we'll start talking about DNS records. Again, this isn't going to be every single DNS record, but it's going to be some of the more common DNS records. Now, to understand DNS, you have to understand a little bit about TCP/IP. And the way I've always explained it in my classes is TCP/IP works just like a telephone number. Don't even think of it as a TCP/IP number. Just think of it as a telephone number. So every computer gets its own telephone number. When you want to make a connection with a computer, you need to call that computer. So, for example, I want to call server A on my local network. When I go to make my call to server A so that I could get to, for example, my home folders, something has to turn that name server A into a telephone number. Just like if you were going to try to contact Will Panek and you wanted to call me, you would call information. You'd say, yes, I'm looking for the telephone number for Will Panek. The operator would look in the database, find Will Panek, return the phone number. That's exactly what DNS does for us. When you're looking for a computer or an internet site like Google, when you type in www.google.com or www.stormwindstudios.com, you're looking to connect to that website. What happens is you don't know the telephone number for that website. So, when you do a example www.stormwindstudios.com, your record gets out there, DNS looks up Stormwind Studios, returns the telephone number, which is the IP address, and then you make your call. Now, there are two versions of TCP/IP that we use in the industry, IPv4 and IPv6. And it depends on what server you're trying to access, depending on which telephone number you're going to get back. But DNS will work with both versions of TCP/IP. So just think of it that way. It's could be very difficult to understand TCP/IP, and a lot of people, when they first especially get into the networking industry, have a hard time understanding how TCP/IP works. Again, just remember it works just like a telephone number. Every computer gets its own number. That's how you call the computer. And just like in a regular telephone service, you need some kind of service that works like information. So that when I don't know the actual telephone number for a computer, I can ask information, and that is DNS. So DNS turns a host name into an IP address. Host names are, for example, servera.stormwinds.com. All right, serverb.willpanek.com. Those are actual host names. They get turned into IP addresses. You make your connection. DNS can also turn an IP address into a host name. That is what we refer to as a reverse lookup. A lot of you may do that when, for example, someone calls you, you don't know who it is, you put the telephone number in Google, Google tells you who's making the call, you're doing a reverse lookup. Well, DNS gives you that same capability. So if you just remember that TCP/IP is just a telephone number and DNS is just information, you'll never have an issue when thinking about TCP/IP and DNS working together. Now, if it is just like information, there needs to be a database. And DNS does have a database. Inside that database, there are records. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about some of the more common record types. we're going to talk about host records. Those are the basic, hey, I need this person's telephone number. You have a name to a number. I need this computer's IP address. So here's the computer name, here's the IP address. That's all that's basically on the record type. It's just a normal record, a host record. A pointer record is a reverse lookup. We're going to talk about canonical names, which is for aliases. We're going to talk about NS records, which actually point you to other DNS servers. We'll talk about how to set up mail records. We'll talk about TXT records. Those are becoming a lot more important in today's day and age, especially if you're working with Office 365 with your network. We'll talk about SRV records, and we're going to talk about start of authority records. So let's just start with the basic record, a host record. All a host record is I always joke around and say it's like an index card in a Rolodex. Kind of dating myself, but if you wanted to look somebody up, if you were at your office and you wanted to call Will Panek at Stormwind, you would go through your Rolodex, you would find the card that said Will Panek, you'd look at the telephone number, you'd make your call. Well, that's all a host record actually is. When you're trying to connect, for example, to server A on your network, DNS looks in its database. It finds the record for server A, it returns the IP address. It's as simple as that. All right, so it is just a straightforward host record. Now, this is the only one where you're going to see two types of host records depending on if you're running IPv4 or IPv6. If you're running IPv4, then it's going to be an A record. If you're running IPv6, it's going to be an AAAA record. And that's the only difference when it comes to DNS. All the other record types remain the same. Only a host record is different between IPv4 and IPv6. Now, host records are the most common records. Every computer, as long as you have it set up properly, when they boot up in the morning, log in with DNS, they actually post a record, a host record, with the DNS server saying, hey, I'm computer 3, here's my IP address. DNS may do some steps to make sure that there is an actual computer 3 within the domain. If there is, it'll accept the record, put it into its database. And now when anybody wants to call computer 3 and they ask DNS who computer 3 is, DNS can give them the IP address. Now, if you wanted to do a reverse lookup, you would then be setting up what we refer to as pointer records, PTR records. Now, this is when you put a TCP/IP number in and it returns the host name. It's a reverse lookup. So you have a forward lookup, which is your host record, and you also have the ability to do a reverse lookup, which we refer to as a PTR record. To have reverse lookups, you have to set up a reverse lookup zone. Let's take a look real quick at a DNS server. This is a DNS server that is running on top of Windows Server 2012 R2. As you can notice here, we have our forward lookup zone and we have our reverse lookup zone. Our forward lookup zone is where all of our normal records go. Our host records, if you're going to set up mail records, if you're going to set up service records. Reverse records are the PTR records, so that if you have for example, an IP address and you need the actual host name returned back, that's what the reverse lookup zone does for you. Another record type that's quite common is a canonical name, or we just refer to it as a CNAME record. CNAME records are alias records. Now, CNAME records can be a great record type, especially if you're moving folders. Let's say, for example, let's go ahead and jump onto a whiteboard here real quick. Let's say, for example, that I have a network setup here. I apologize. Let me turn my pen on here for you so that you can see what I'm writing. So let's say, for example, that we have a Windows Server 2012 R2 server, and this is going to be hosting home folders. And the name of this server, we're just going to say is Server A. Well, Server A is getting old. Even though it runs 2012 R2, we decide that we buy a brand new system, put a nice rack mount system into our computer room. It's got a lot more hard drive. It's got a lot more RAM. So we want to go ahead and we want to move all the home folders to this machine. And we're going to call this Server B. Now, the problem that we have is everybody in the company, when they try to connect to their home folders, is going to try to connect to Server A / and whatever the name of their home folder is. So, what you could do is you could go into Active Directory and you could change the path for every single user in your company. If you have a small company, it's not that difficult to do. Or, once you move all the home folders over, and you're going to be taking this server offline, maybe you're going to rebuild it, maybe you're going to make it, stronger, you can set up an alias record, a CNAME record. And what you'll do is you'll actually say, hey, if you're looking for Server A, you're going to automatically get redirected to Server B. It's an alias. You think you're going to one box where you're actually going to another. Now, a lot of people like to use CNAME records because they don't want their end users to actually know the real server names in the server room. So a lot of times they'll set up CNAME records so that the people are accessing, for example, they'll type in Server A / the home name of their home folder, and they're getting redirected to a server called Mars. And they don't know that the real server name is Mars, because they've used CNAME records. So CNAME records can be a very helpful record. They're aliases. They allow you to redirect if you have to take a box offline, or they can actually just hide server details so that your clients have no idea what the real machine is that they're connecting to. Now, there may be times when you're going to have multiple DNS servers in your network. Now, a good example is, let's say we have our tree set up here. Now remember, in the Microsoft world, whenever you see a triangle, that represents a tree. All right? And we buy out another company, and they have their own network. So here, we're just going to say, I'm going to use the company that I trained for, Stormwind. So let's just say, for example, that this is stormwind.com, and this is New Hampshire.stormwind. And we just bought out Contasso.com. All right, and over here, let's just say that this is, we'll just say us.contasso.com. What we could do is, inside of our DNS server, we can actually set up an NS record. And we can say, hey, if you're looking for Contasso.com, go to the DNS server that's hosting Contasso.com. So let's say this DNS server is called, I'm going to call this one, just to make it easy, server1.contasso.com. So what you would say is, you would say, hey, if you're looking for Contasso.com, you need to go to server1.contasso.com. Now, the nice thing about this is that you'll have an associated host record somewhere in DNS. You'll set up an A record that basically says it's server1.contasso.com is this IP address. I don't know, 10.10.10.100. Now, the cool thing here is when your users want to connect to Contasso.com, instead of going out to the internet and then getting pointed back to Contasso.com, it'll automatically point them to the DNS server on Contasso.com. So they'll automatically get redirected to that DNS server, find the record they're looking for, and connect to the server within the Contasso.com domain. So NS records point you to other DNS servers. They could be other DNS servers within your own company. They could be other DNS servers for people you've partnered up with. They could be DNS servers out on Microsoft's website if you're using Office 365. So NS servers can be a very important record type that you go in and build, because NS records can point you to other DNS servers. Now you build NS records, believe it or not, in the zone properties. You don't click on forward lookup and say new NS record. When you click on your forward properties, so let me jump out here. When I click on, for example, the properties, I have my zone set up, and I right click and I go into the properties of that zone, you'll see that there's an NS server right here. Okay, this is where you build your NS records. So, for example, if I needed to build one for Contasso.com, I would add in server1.contasso.com and what the IP address is going to be. And at that point, I now have set up a name server record. I just wanted to make sure everybody understands it's not like you just right click, all right, and go down and say, hey, new NS record. NS records are done within the zone properties. Now, another very common record type, and this is a record type that every single one of you have, but you may have never set one up, is an MX record. MX records are mail exchanger records. And what MX records do is they are records that are normally set on the internet, and they will point to a mail server. MX records show where your corporate mail server is. So when you send an email to wpanek@willpanek.com, when that email hits the internet, somewhere out there has to be an MX record that says, hey, if you're looking for willpanek.com, you need to send it to mailservera.willpanek.com. And it knows exactly where to send that mail to. Now, the reason why most of us don't set up MX records in our own company is because if we're using Exchange, and by the way, just because it's called a mail exchanger record does not mean it only works with Exchange. You have to set up an MX record for any mail system that you're using. But let's say that we have an Exchange server in-house. I'm going to use Outlook to connect to that Exchange server. I don't need to have an MX record inside of my own company, because when you set up Outlook, you tell Outlook who the Exchange server is. So I don't need an MX record inside. So most IT people have never set up MX records, because MX records are records that get built out on the internet. And normally this is a service that is provided for you when you sign up with an ISP. So, for example, if I sign up with AT&T or, Verizon or Fios or whatever you happen to have, a lot of times when you're setting up your company, they'll ask you who's hosting your mail server. If you're hosting your own, you'll give them that information, and they normally will set the MX record up for you. It's not always the case, but an MX record is missing one thing, though. As you can see, it says, hey, if you're looking for willpanek.com, you go to mailservera.willpanek.com. The thing that it's missing is an IP address. So when you build an MX record, you have to have an A record out there someplace that says mail server. For example, you're going to have an A record that says, hey, if you're looking for mailservera.willpanek.com, you go to this IP address, 69.100.8.40, for example. And that way, when you're looking for willpanek.com to send mail to, and you know that you're going to be sending mail to mail server A has a corresponding A record out there with the IP address. Now, if you notice before mail server A, there's a number. It says MX10. MX records can actually have priorities put on them. The lower the number, the higher the priority. So if I set up a second MX record, and I said I'm going to have an MX record of 20, and it's going to be mail server b.willpanek.com. The 10, this record here, will always be the one that gets used first. MX20 will never get used unless mail server A goes down. So, the lower the number, the higher the value, the more it gets used. But companies do, when they set up MX records, normally put in, if you have more than one exchange server, they'll normally put in more than one MX record so that if one server goes down, the other server can still receive all the mail for the company. So you would set up your primary exchange server as the MX10, and you would set up the secondary as MX20. Now, when you set up a network, automatically there are services that are running on the network. One of the services, for example, is the global catalog service. If I'm going to throw myself here up on screen for a second. All right. This is one of my books that I've written, the MCSA book for your server exams. This book here covers 410, 411, and 412. If you own this book and I said, hey, I want you to go in and I want you to look up what global catalogs do. You would go to the back of the book, find global catalogs in the index, turn to that page and read about global catalogs. Well, believe it or not, that's actually what a global catalog is. A global catalog is an index. It helps you find stuff within Active Directory. Whenever you're logging onto the network, believe it or not, the domain controller talks to a global catalog to find out who you are. So that global catalog is running a service, the global catalog service. Domain controllers are running a service, the authentication service. When these systems log in with DNS, not only will they say, hey, I need an A record. My name is server A. This is my IP address. They'll also say, by the way, I'm running the authentication service. Or I'm running the global catalog service. And what will happen is a record in DNS will be built specifically for that service. Now, you as an end user, you're trying to find something within Active Directory. Your machine is trying to find the global catalog so you can find what you need in Active Directory. You can ask DNS, hey, who's running the global catalog service? DNS looks under its SRV records, finds which machine is running the global catalog service, gives you back that IP address, and then you can talk to the global catalog to find out where you need to find something within Active Directory. When you're trying to log in to a domain controller, if you can't find a domain controller and you're a DNS client, you may ask DNS, hey, who's running the authentication service? DNS will look up that SRV record, find out which machine is authenticating users onto the network. It'll give you back the IP address of the domain controller, and then at that point, you'll send that domain controller your username and password so that you can log in. So service records are records that point to services that are running on a network. Most SRV records are created automatically by the server that's running the service. when they log in to the DNS server and they say, hey, here's my server name, here's my IP address, they also automatically will say, this is the services I'm running. If for some reason you need to, you can go in though and specifically build your own SRV records. So service records help you find a specific service within your network. Now, TXT records are probably going to be new to a lot of you. TXT records are not a very common record within a normal network. TXT records are custom DNS records. All right, TXT basically is short for a text record, and it's a type of resource record, almost like an A record. But it's used to associate some arbitrary or some type of text with a host. Now, when might you use a TXT record? When are they becoming a requirement? Well, believe it or not, if you are deciding that you want to start working with Office 365, you're going to have to build TXT records, because your network to work with the Office 365 network will have to have TXT records set up and running so that you can communicate with the Office 365 network. If you're not going to be using Microsoft's Office 365, most likely you're never going to probably create a TXT record, but just know that TXT records are just custom resource records that you can create. Now, sometimes we set up a special TXT record called an SPF TXT record. An SPF stands for Sender Policy Framework TXT record. And that type of record, that type of TXT record, is set up to prevent spoofing on your system. So if you need to set up an SPF TXT record, that can help prevent spoofing. So if you need to find out a little bit more, if you're getting spoofed a lot or your company is running into issues, go out onto Microsoft's website, do a little research on SPF TXT records and see if that is a record type that can help you with some of the problems that you may be running into. But again, normally this is a record type that we're going to use if you're going to be connecting into like an Office 365 online service. Now, every single zone has a start of authority record. A start of authority record, again, is not an actual record. It's not like you can click on a zone and say new record type. To get to the start of authority, you got to click on the zone and go into the zone properties. When you get into the zone properties, at that point, you'll be able to look at your SOA record. So for example, let me go ahead and put you onto the server. Here is our SOA record, start of authority record. The start of authority record tells the actual DNS server who the owner is with the zone, what the authoritative server is. It has a serial number. It tells it how often that you're going to be refreshing DNS and how long what we refer to is time to live. So if you're looking for a specific DNS record, or you're looking to return or find a DNS value, if it doesn't happen within a certain amount of time, the time to live more or less tells the server that's it, you've had enough time, you can't find it, return an error. So for example, if I type in www.kitasopanek.com and there's no such thing, after a certain amount of time, you're going to get an error saying this website can't be found. The time to live helps determine how long that is before the error happens. Now, one thing I want to show you, if you notice here on your serial number, this serial number is set to 65. At any time, I can click the increment button. And if I do, I change it to 66. If I have multiple DNS servers and I increment my serial number what that does is that forces replication. Because when two DNS servers replicate with each other, what happens is they'll say, hey, I have you down as a serial number of 65. The other server will say, no, I'm down with a serial number of 66. And at that point, it'll force replication. So if you need to force replication, one of the ways that you can do it among your DNS servers is just by incrementing the serial number. So the SOA record, more or less, is a record that just tells the zone about its own information. It says who the owner of the zone is, what the authoritative server of the zone is, again, the serial number, how often it's going to refresh, and the time to live for your records. So SOA records are very important records because they tell the zone more or less about itself. All right. If you haven't had a chance and you would like to, please feel free to go out and visit my YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/c/William Panek. I have dozens of videos out there on all kinds of server and client videos in case you're taking exams, in case you need to learn about TCP/IP, DNS, Windows 10, Windows Server. Also, if you are looking for training, you could contact us or go try to find me, and I'll help you through stormwindstudios.com. Stormwind Studios is an online training provider, which means the classes are live every day, but you watch those classes online, just like you're watching this video. The cool thing is you're able to see me, just like you've been able to see me. You're able to see my whiteboard. You're able to see my server. Plus, you're also able to ask questions. You're able to interact. So it is a full training course that you can, that on any IT subject you want. Stormwind Studios does IT classes on Cisco, Microsoft, CISSP, EC Council, you name it, they have classes on it. So if you would like to learn more about Microsoft servers, or you would like to learn more about the clients like Windows 10, feel free to go out to www.stormwindstudios.com and you can talk to one of them about getting into one of our classes. I teach the Microsoft classes. I am one of the senior Microsoft instructors with Stormwind Studios, and I'd love to see you in one of our classes. So, I hope you enjoyed this video that gives you a little bit of information on DNS and the different record types. And again, if you have any other comments or would like to see videos on any other subjects, please feel free to just go out to my channel and ask for a specific type of video, and I'll try to put one together for you so that you can learn about a subject. So I am Stormwind Studios instructor and Cybex author, William Panek. I hope you have a terrific day. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in one of my classes at Stormwinds real soon. Thanks again.